In a world increasingly shaped by geopolitical tensions and domestic political maneuvering, recent developments in both the United States and China have underscored the complexities of international relations and their local ramifications. On March 29, 2025, two notable incidents highlighted the fraying ties between the U.S. and China, each revealing the intricate interplay of politics, education, and commerce. In a striking move, the New College of Florida terminated the employment of Kevin Wang, a Chinese language professor who had sought asylum in the U.S. and was authorized to work in the country. This dismissal, rooted in Florida's controversial SB 846 law, exemplifies the state's increasingly stringent stance on hiring individuals from so-called countries of concern, a category that includes China. Wang's contract was ended not due to any misconduct as stated in his termination letter, but rather because of the law's stipulations which prevent public universities from engaging with foreign nationals from these countries without state approval. According to Wang, who had previously faced political repression in China for his critiques of the Chinese Communist Party, this action felt like a distressing echo of his past. "I never expected to face such a distressing experience after escaping persecution from the CCP in China, only to encounter a somewhat similar situation at New College in the United States," he remarked. The implications of this law are significant as it represents a broader trend in U.S. education policy under the influence of Governor Ron DeSantis's administration, which is actively reshaping the academic landscape to align with a more conservative ethos. This transformation has included the hiring of ideologically aligned faculty and the reinstatement of controversial courses, further polarizing the educational environment. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, Chinese state media recently condemned a deal involving CK Hutchison's investments in a Panama port, a move that highlights the heightened scrutiny of foreign investments during a period of rising nationalism and economic protectionism in China. The Chinese government's reaction to foreign business dealings underscores its growing concerns over national sovereignty and economic security. While the specific reasons behind the media's condemnation remain somewhat ambiguous, analysts suggest it reflects fears over potential foreign encroachments on critical infrastructure, particularly from entities that could be perceived as aligned with Western interests. These developments in both countries illustrate a broader narrative of mutual suspicion and the impacts of local policies on global business and academic freedom. As the U.S. continues to adopt measures that restrict engagement with foreign nationals, particularly from China, it risks isolating itself from a wealth of knowledge and cultural exchange that international scholars bring. Conversely, China's tightening grip on foreign investments signals a shift towards a more insular economic approach, potentially stifling the inflow of technology and capital that has historically fueled its growth. Looking ahead, the intersection of education, commerce, and geopolitics will likely remain a contentious battleground, with Florida's educational policies potentially setting a precedent for other states and China's aggressive stance against foreign investment continuing to evolve. Stakeholders in both nations must navigate an increasingly complex landscape. As the world watches these developments unfold, the future of U.S. China relations remains uncertain, marked by both opportunity and significant challenges. In a significant development concerning the future of Tibetan Buddhism, a prominent Chinese scholar has declared that any reincarnation of the Dalai Lama identified outside of China will not receive recognition from Beijing. This assertion comes in response to the exiled Tibetan leader's recent comments about his potential reincarnation occurring as a child born outside Chinese territory, a notion that has sparked considerable concern among Chinese officials. Li Diqing, the Deputy Director General of the China Tibetology Research Center, articulated Beijing's stance during a forum in the capital, asserting that the suggestion of a foreign successor is fundamentally incompatible with China's established protocols for managing the reincarnation of Tibetan Buddhist living Buddhas. "If the next Dalai Lama is declared to have been reincarnated abroad, I think it is illegal," Li stated, emphasizing that such a declaration would violate traditional religious rituals and historical customs observed in Tibetan Buddhism. He further reinforced that any foreign declaration of the Dalai Lama's reincarnation cannot be recognized by the Chinese government. This statement follows the Dalai Lama's publication of a book earlier in March in which he disclosed his views regarding his reincarnation, a topic that has historically been a source of tension between China and the Tibetan leadership. The Dalai Lama, who has been living in exile since 1959, has often highlighted the importance of autonomy for Tibetans, which Beijing views as a challenge to its authority. The controversy surrounding the identification of a successor is particularly acute given the Chinese Communist Party's vested interest in controlling religious practices within its borders. Li's comments were made during a forum organized by the All China Journalists Association, where the reincarnation system of Tibetan Buddhism was a focal point. The ongoing discussions reflect a broader geopolitical and cultural struggle as the Tibetan spiritual leader's potential successor could significantly influence the religious landscape in Tibet as well as the region's relationship with the Chinese government. As tensions rise over this contentious issue, the implications extend beyond religious matters. The narrative of the Dalai Lama's reincarnation intersects with China's efforts to exert control over Tibetan culture and spirituality, thus representing a broader strategy of governance in areas of ethnic sensitivity. The insistence on recognizing only a successor identified within China underscores the government's approach to Tibetan Buddhism as both a cultural and a political tool. Looking ahead, the outcome of this situation could have profound effects on Tibetan society and the region's political dynamics. As the Dalai Lama ages, the question of his reincarnation will become increasingly pressing, potentially shaping the future of Tibetan Buddhism and the Chinese government's policies toward Tibet. The international community will likely watch closely to see how this complex interplay of religion, politics, and identity unfolds in the coming years. In a week marked by significant high-profile gatherings in China, global perceptions of the shifting balance of power between the East and the West took center stage. The prevailing narrative articulated by Chinese President Xi Jinping and echoed at both the China Development Forum in Beijing and the BOA Forum for Asia suggests a growing confidence in China's ascent on the world stage, juxtaposed against a perceived decline of Western influence. This sentiment was palpable as over 80 leaders from multinational corporations, including tech giants like Apple and automotive stalwarts such as BMW, converged in Beijing. In a keynote address, Premier Li Chang emphasized the importance of collaboration against U.S. protectionism, asserting, "We should work together to resist the United States' protectionism and safeguard globalization." This call for unity resonated at the subsequent BOA Forum, where participants expressed optimism about China's role in global affairs while lamenting the U.S.'s retreat from international institutions. Prominent economist Ian Golden, who attended both forums, highlighted a notable shift in sentiment among global leaders, saying people don't want to go to a conference in the U.S. anymore since Trump, referencing the challenges posed by visa issues and border scrutiny that have deterred international engagement in the United States. This shift underscores a growing preference for engaging with China as a leader in a multipolar world. However, amid this rising optimism, China's financial landscape is fraught with vulnerabilities that could impede its ambitions of becoming a global financial superpower. As Xi Jinping has called for, the nation must navigate its path toward financial security while contending with high debt levels, exposure to foreign sanctions, and a shallow financial market structure. China's economic health is at risk, particularly from the specter of increased sanctions similar to those imposed on Russia. Analysts warn that if Western powers were to impose broad financial sanctions on China, the consequences could be dire, hampering trade flows and destabilizing the country's economic framework. As it stands, approximately 71% of China's $6 trillion in trade is conducted in dollars and other foreign currencies, making it vulnerable to disruptions in payment systems like SWIFT. Debt levels in China have reached concerning heights, with non-financial debt soaring to 292% of GDP in 2024, creating a precarious situation for both local governments and corporations. The intertwining of local government debts with struggling real estate projects has raised alarms about potential financial contagion, particularly as geopolitical tensions heighten the risk of defaults. Meanwhile, the shallowness of China's financial markets continues to hinder foreign investment, with the lack of robust RMB-denominated assets making it difficult for the country to attract capital. Despite efforts to liberalize its markets, the persistent state intervention in banking and investment sectors has led to a perception of risk that deters foreign investors. Yet amidst these challenges, there are signs of resilience within China's financial system. The country's extensive trade network, particularly with emerging markets, has provided a buffer against potential sanctions, allowing it to maintain a degree of economic stability. Moreover, China's growing role in multilateral governance through initiatives like the Belt and Road Initiative and the BRICS Consortium reflects its ambition to reshape global financial architecture in its favor. As Cathay Group prepares to bolster connectivity with mainland China, launching nearly 300 return flights weekly, it exemplifies the broader trend of increasing economic integration between China and its partners. This move not only enhances travel options but also reinforces the cultural and economic ties that underpin China's global strategy. In conclusion, while China's ambition to ascend as a financial superpower is palpable, the path forward is fraught with risks that require careful navigation. The interplay of domestic vulnerabilities and external pressures will shape the future of China's financial landscape. Observers are keen to see whether the strengths driven by its vast economy and trade ties can counterbalance the challenges posed by high debt, regulatory weaknesses, and geopolitical tensions. As the global narrative evolves, China's ability to adapt and innovate will be critical in determining its role in the world. On March 5, 2025, China unveiled its defense budget for the year, allocating approximately 249 billion Chinese yuan, 1.81 trillion, marking a 7.2% increase from the previous year. While this figure solidifies China's position as having the second-largest defense budget globally, it remains an intriguing focal point for analysts concerned about regional security dynamics. The budget is notably under 1.5% of China's GDP, leading to significant debates regarding the true extent of its military expenditure and capabilities. Critics argue that this budget does not account for a variety of expenses, including weapon imports and funding for the People's Armed Police, which may mean that China's actual defense expenditure could be much higher. This distinction is critical, as some estimates suggest that the true costs could range from one-third to even half more than the official figures. Atul Kumar, a fellow at the Observer Research Foundation, emphasizes that China's robust GDP growth continues to provide substantial resources for its armed forces. He suggests that even with a relatively modest percentage of GDP allocated to defense, the People's Liberation Army (PLA) may well possess the means to expand its influence significantly across the Indo-Pacific region and beyond. The context of China's defense spending often leads to comparisons with the United States, which allocated about $850 billion for its defense in the same year, constituting over 3% of its GDP. This disparity allows China to position its budget as a minimum requirement to safeguard its national interests. PLA spokesperson Wu Qian has stated that the budget is essential for ensuring national sovereignty and security amid ongoing military transformations. An interesting trend emerges when examining China's defense budget growth rate over the past decade. It has been on a decline, moving away from the double-digit increases seen in the previous 2 decades. From 2015 to 2025, while the GDP expanded by nearly 76% from about $11 trillion to nearly $19.5 trillion, the defense budget increased by only 72%. This has resulted in a relatively low share of defense spending in the context of the broader economy, hovering around 5% of central government expenditure. This suggests a prioritization of economic growth and domestic stability over military expansion. China's defense budget is not fully transparent, as it does not detail specific allocations for its military branches. Analysts highlight that Beijing's lack of transparency serves its strategic interests, allowing it to maintain a degree of secrecy about its military capabilities. However, recent accounting reforms have made the official figures more credible, with additional funding sources becoming limited. Still, some analysts assert that the actual defense budget is likely much higher than reported, citing past estimates that have suggested figures as high as $700 billion, although these claims often rely on flawed calculations. The budget reveals a shift in spending priorities with significant allocations towards personnel costs, training, and equipment. Historically, personnel costs dominated the budget, but a strategic shift post-Gulf Wars has led to increased investments in high-tech weaponry and enhanced training practices. As the PLA has downsized its active personnel to about 2 million. The savings have been redirected to bolster training and operational readiness, allowing for a more efficient military structure. China's defense industry has also made strides in high-tech weapon development, benefiting from the country's advanced manufacturing capabilities and increasing arms export revenues. This enables the PLA to procure advanced weaponry at competitive costs domestically, allowing for a greater share of the defense budget to be allocated toward training and joint operational capabilities. Such developments are reflected in the PLA's recent military exercises, which expand its operational reach beyond its immediate geographic boundaries. As tensions escalate in the region, particularly regarding Taiwan, the implications of China's defense budget are becoming increasingly evident. Taiwan's recent military activities have included increased incursions by Chinese aircraft, prompting a re-evaluation of defense strategies and military exercises focused on potential conflicts in the coming years. The Taiwanese Ministry of National Defense has indicated a shift toward addressing gray zone tactics employed by China, with upcoming military drills set to prepare for the possibility of an invasion by 2027. China's military modernization strategy aimed at achieving comprehensive dominance in the Indo-Pacific signals to regional powers the necessity of recalibrating their defense postures. India's defense community, for instance, has been advocating for increased military spending, suggesting it should exceed 2% of GDP to keep pace with Chinese capabilities. However, as China's experience illustrates, economic growth and advancements in high-tech civil industries are crucial for national security, allowing for substantial defense resources even with relatively modest budget allocations. With projections indicating that China's GDP could reach $30 trillion by 2035. The potential for increased defense spending remains significant. Even a defense allocation below 2% could yield a budget of $500 to $600 billion, giving the PLA the financial resources to pursue its national interests with minimal resistance. This evolving landscape presents critical challenges for regional powers, emphasizing the need for strategic foresight and collaboration to address the growing influence of China in the Indo-Pacific and beyond. As the dynamics of military spending continue to shift, the global security architecture may be redefined in the years to come. In a world increasingly defined by geopolitical tensions and shifting alliances, the relationship between China and Europe is at a critical juncture. As both regions seek to navigate their complex interdependence, a former top diplomat has emphasized the need for China to take concrete steps to build trust with European nations. Arantxa González, who served as Spain's foreign minister from 2020 to 2021, articulated this perspective during a recent forum in Hainan Province, China. She underscored that fostering a functional relationship with the European Union (EU) requires more than just rhetoric. It necessitates genuine action on key issues, particularly in light of the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. González asserted if China really wants to invest in the future of the relationship with Europe, China knows what's important to Europe. She highlighted that European concerns are multifaceted, encompassing climate change, the quest for a sustainable resolution to the Ukraine crisis, and the necessity for open markets characterized by fair conditions. Her comments come at a time when there are indications of a thaw in relations between China and Europe, marked by statements from European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen suggesting potential for deeper trade ties with Beijing. However, González's call for action reflects broader anxieties in Europe regarding China's global ambitions. As China continues to assert its influence on the world stage, the EU is increasingly wary of the implications for its own strategic interests. The relationship is further complicated by China's growing alignment with Russia and Iran, particularly as these nations engage in joint military exercises such as the recent Security Belt 2025. These exercises conducted near key maritime choke points underscore China's strategic intent to enhance its security partnerships while simultaneously countering Western influence. In a related vein, China's initiatives in Latin America exemplify its broader geopolitical strategy. Recent developments indicate a tightening of ties, with Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum announcing a review of tariffs on Chinese imports, citing their impact on local industries. Meanwhile, Venezuela has boosted oil exports to China amid U.S. sanctions, reflecting a deepening economic interdependence. Such dynamics illustrate how China is positioning itself as a key player in global trade and diplomacy, often challenging U.S. hegemony in these regions. The geopolitical landscape is further complicated by the specter of nuclear proliferation. Charles Oppenheimer, grandson of the famed physicist, recently voiced support for former President Donald Trump's proposal for direct talks on nuclear arms control involving the U.S., China, and Russia. He emphasized the urgent need for dialogue to avert a new arms race and underscored that cooperation rather than competition is essential for global security. Oppenheimer's perspective resonates particularly in the context of rising nuclear tensions, with China reportedly expanding its nuclear arsenal in response to perceived threats from the U.S. As the international community grapples with these intertwined issues, the pathway forward for China and Europe remains uncertain. The call for China to do the right thing is echoed not only in the realm of diplomacy but also in broader global security considerations. The implications of these relationships will undoubtedly shape the geopolitical landscape for years to come, with the potential for both cooperation and conflict looming on the horizon. In conclusion, as China navigates its complex relationships with Europe and other global powers, the need for constructive dialogue and actionable commitments has never been more pressing. The coming months will be pivotal in determining whether these nations can work together to address shared challenges or if diverging interests will lead to further estrangement. The stakes are high and the eyes of the world remain fixed on how these dynamics unfold.